So I generally say, I mean, sports law analyst is pretty safe, but I'm also an attorney, so whatever way you feel comfortable. It's definitely at least sports law analyst, but you could say he's an attorney and a sports law analyst.
Okay. You've got an Esquire on your name, obviously. So
I do. Well, it's
I
funny. In between our last conversations, I had a friend recommend to me. He's like, your following will probably go up if you just change your actual name on Twitter to Sports Law Lust. And I'm like, okay, like why? And he's like, well, casual sports fans, they get turned off by the word Esquire. So I'm like, that's fair. So now, I mean, I'm not obviously I have a real name, but it looks better on Twitter just with the sports law up front.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I kind of like to start these things informally. We're already recording, so we're here with Dan Lust, who's a sports law analyst and a lawyer. So I would hope you're a lawyer if you're a sports law analyst. Are there a lot of sports law analysts out there who aren't lawyers?
No, I think that's a requirement, a prerequisite. I
How
think
did
that's
you
fair.
How did you get into this? Because the cross section of being a sports fan and anything is understandable, but being a sports fan and then also making your career kind of adjacent to sports, which is something that I've done in my past as a sports talk radio show host, not just a radio host or a talker. How did you get into this?
So, my background, I mean, obviously I grew up, I'm sure like you, I grew up as a massive, massive sports fan. And then, when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I didn't really know. I just knew that I really liked sports. And I heard enough people say, if you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. I've heard that a ton of times. So in college, I got a job with the New York Giants. I worked for them on and off, during the season, for, 4 to 5 years. And then I did it all the way through law school. And then I went to law school. Just like I'm sure a lot of people, my dad went to law school, so it sounded like a good idea. And I looked around football, and I saw there was enough people in high positions, be it Howie Roseman with the Eagles, different Mike Tannenbaum with the Jets, a lot of GMs that had a JD, and I thought it couldn't hurt my progression in the law, and it couldn't hurt my progression in sports if I just did the two together. And then fast forward 10 years. I just kept writing and kept talking about sports, and then I had the legal background. So, now I'm called on by a lot of radio shows. I write a lot, really about this intersection. And especially nowadays, there's so many legal questions about liability, about CBAs, about union discussions. So it really does help to have this legal background, and then obviously just be an obsessive sports fan at the end of the day.
Okay, so I have wanted to ask somebody about this for a long time because I feel like the industry of sports, at least when it comes to the laws that are on the books, the big ones, they're all basically exemptions for sports, right? There's antitrust exemptions, there's cable exemptions, there's likeness and trademark rights exemptions in sports. There's all kinds of ways in which sports leagues over the last 70, 80 years or so have basically found a way to get people to give sports a pass on being business, which has had some really interesting effects on how sports has evolved over the last 20, 25 years. How does it compare to other industries when it comes to the way in which it's regulated, how enforceable things are, contracts and how they work? What has made sports unique and allowed them to basically build a tremendous financial empire out of a game?
So, I mean, the answer is it normal for sports to be treated this way relative to other businesses? I mean, we've had such a long history in the law of that. I mean, probably the best example, if I can give you listeners one that would make sense. Baseball for years has had an antitrust exemption. An antitrust is a fancy way it's a certain code in our country that businesses should be able to compete freely. There should be a free market. Capitalism should be encouraged. And there's certain antitrust laws to prevent, certain entities from having too much power. Baseball years ago went to the federal government and asked for an antitrust exemption and got it. So they are allowed to do certain things that would otherwise be illegal. The number one, that maybe that people don't realize, something like the draft in sports. it's textbook antitrust violation.
Right.
If you were to leave your school and be, you went to Harvard and you're the top engineer in the country, and you're ready to pick your spot, whether go in the country, all of a sudden you got a letter in the mail that you were, drafted by this Alaska uh, engineering firm, had to go there. That's textbook antitrust violation. So, baseball can get away with it because it's antitrust exemption. The other sports, for whatever reason, don't have it. They have to get around it with various union exceptions. But um, it's funny, sports are given a lot of leeway, especially even now, TJ, with the atmosphere that we're dealing with in the world. I mean, you heard Donald Trump say, you've seen it in Florida with Governor DeSantis. Sports are being given kind of this lane to try to come back to the market first before normal businesses. So I guess if there's a reasoning behind it, it's because the public needs sports, or and I guess as Donald Trump is saying, it's part of the way to make the world more normal. And that baseball got an anti-public entertainment at a certain extent, and you don't have business have the same entertainment level that a baseball has or a football has.
Do you think that baseball is more hurt or less hurt by the pandemic because of the daily nature of it? I feel like there's a lot of planning that has to go into, especially the first games that they play here, where, obviously like Germany is having games, but, there's no people. They're trying to figure out exactly how to put people in the stands, whether or not that's viable, or whether or not they're just going to have games on the field with no people in the stands at all, and everybody just watches it on TV. How is this going to change things? And baseball in particular. And the reason I bring baseball up is because we're in baseball season, and it's we didn't get a start to the season really. So they're still. I would imagine that they're one of the leagues that is most susceptible to maybe the financial disasters of what the pandemic has wrought on their sport.
Yeah, so I guess I've been watching at least probably more Bundesliga than I've ever watched before. So they're wondering how to get fans in the stands. TJ, they figured out a weird way is by putting cardboard cutouts of fans' faces in the stands, which I'm not sure of the logic behind it. But it might be better than Taiwan's version of putting robots in the stands, which
Sure.
I'm not sure of the logic behind that either. But I think when it comes down to it, baseball, in terms of the day-to-day aspect of sport, baseball, has to deal with it every single day. So, for football, you need a certain amount of tests. Obviously, everyone's kind of on the same page that in order for any of these sports to come back, you need, from a liability perspective, you need tests every single day, or as much as possible. Football is in a different world because you don't have to come to the stadium every single day, other than just Sundays or game day. Baseball is an everyday sport to some extent, so you have that issue on the first level. So the I guess the pro to baseball, I was up this morning, and TJ, I mentioned offline, I have a 6-month-old daughter, so the KBO being on at 5:30 in the morning, not
Congratulations,
so
buddy.
bad. I'll take it. Thank you very much, I appreciate it. So the KBO and the CPBL in Taiwan, they're both happening. And why are they happening? Because baseball, at least in just a positional sense, you can stand 6 feet away from someone basically 99% of the time, unless you're holding a runner on base or there's some type of tag play, or you're the catcher and there's a hitter there. So I think baseball is actually potentially in a better spot in terms of just the way the game works versus basketball, soccer, football, which are all inherently contact sports.
Hmm.
But this is, I'm very fascinated by this. It's There's still a level when you excel. The players are the ones that have the entire risk, and they're not willing to compromise and take further reductions off the deal they already agreed to when they're still the only ones facing the risk. So,
Right.
I think it's a problem in all sports, but particularly baseball, TJ, because unlike basketball, baseball hasn't started yet. So there is no kind of like LeBron really wants basketball to go forward because the Lakers are in a good spot, right? They're kind of poised to make a championship run. There has been no baseball. So that's when I get a little alarmed when I listen to Blake Snell's comments and he goes mentally, he's not preparing for 2020. He's preparing for the 2021 season because he just doesn't
Right.
see a way to play. So, yeah, in that sense, I think it's a little worrisome, for, less so for football because they're not really starting until September and October. So there is some more wiggle room to see if everything improves by then.
Yeah, and so as far as the player's perspective is concerned, because you mentioned Blake Snell, and Blake Snell came out and basically said, "Look, I'm gonna get mine. That's the only way I'm playing." And a lot of fans are gonna get gruff at that, and I understand the frustration of seeing the lid peeled back, so to speak, on sports, and you see how much it is like everybody else's lives about how much you're getting paid to do your job. And I do think that it is a little bit difficult for owners to say, okay, look, we have this revenue sharing model. We're going to be able to make less revenue. So instead of sharing in the larger pool, let's share in the smaller pool, and everybody takes reductions, but you take all the risk. And I think that's the problem that the players have is you are not taking any risk. We're taking all of the physical risk. So therefore, this split has to change because the circumstances of the world have changed. And I absolutely understand that. But from an economic perspective, which is the most rational discipline on the planet, right? It just follows sets of rules. Economically, no business owner is ever going to agree to that. So what do? You just don't play baseball, I guess, right? You just wait. I think that's where we're at this point right now, right?
So that's the conversation that casual fans and non-sports fans are having. If you're in a position, and I'm kind of fascinated to see it across all sports, but I guess at a fundamental level, if you are not willing to play sports and you're not willing to take on the risk, right? You just have to ask yourself, what tangible economic benefit are you providing to an owner, right? You're paid a certain salary because you're a good baseball player and you add some type of skill to the team. But if you're for whatever reason, and you can't really fault anybody if you have a pre-existing health issue or you have young children and you're not comfortable playing, the question then becomes at what point do you no longer get paid? And the reason I bring it up in all workers work context, I know a ton of friends and just you see it enough online, people that aren't comfortable working. And what do those people do? It's the real world. The real world. You get furloughed if you're not comfortable in that type of environment, or you're not able to. But it's an understanding. You don't want to work because there's inherent risk, and you don't think the money is worth it. So I find it very fascinating. The real question is going to be at the end of the day, at what point does this really change sports? Because there's a story that came out a couple of days ago, TJ, about Larry Nance, who's a forward in the Cleveland Cavs. He has Crohn's disease, which is known for a weakened autoimmune disease.
Yep.
So he's someone that's objectively probably more at risk than others. So he's hoping that there would be a carve out for players that don't feel comfortable playing. What that carve out means, it's unclear. If you just have a clean walk away, and for that year, his contract moves forward, or if for some reason he's going to get penalized, it's unclear exactly what that will look like. But for someone like a Blake Snell, and I think it's just important to point out too, on a health, yeah, a lot of players, and we saw a lot in basketball, get diagnosed and they come back and they're fine and they don't have any symptoms or anything. Blake Snell points out, and again, TJ, you and I aren't doctors, we're not scientists or anything like that, but there are studies that show that the effects of COVID, even with a positive test, you might be fully healthy, but there's still long-term effects of a COVID diagnosis. And that's what Blake Snell's fear is. He says, I don't feel comfortable going back because I don't know what this is going to do for my career in the long term. So that's the fear that people are really grappling with. And if you're not comfortable taking on that risk, that's why you have the union to fight on your behalf to try to get some type of fair carve out for you.
Yeah, sure. And I understand the frustrations that fans have having to listen to all of this stuff because it's not sports, right? But at the same time, this kind of is sports for the law or the people who are really into negotiations, and if for anybody who has never been in a contract negotiation, I would just like to tell you that there are lots of people who just that's their Super Bowl, man. They get in there, they're ready to do battle. So, not to say that they are happy about COVID-19 or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. But just the generalized idea of contract negotiations, people get really competitive with that stuff and they want to win. And that's exactly what's happening right now, right? That's why lawyers get paid, right? They get paid to win and get you the best financial deal possible.
Yeah, I mean, I know what you're saying. I mean, the sports fan inside me doesn't like these conversations, and I'm very active on Twitter. I like to try to post good news, but when the news is that Blake Snell is thinking about preparing for 2021 in a canceled season, that's not good news. But the reason, I'm sure Blake Snell wasn't thinking about this, but saying something like that then creates a lot of leverage for the union attorneys, right? Because at the end of the day, right, baseball needs the players to come to the table in order to have a season. I mean, could you have a season like you had in the movie The Replacements and have scab players? Sure. You can't really rule anything out. You can't. But baseball is not baseball without that. And I remember, I wrote a story on this way back when, but the 1994 baseball strike was just handled. Fans felt so poorly on both sides of the equation with respect to the attorneys, and baseball and the players, they finally solved their issues. They're ready to come back. And TJ, guess who didn't come back? The fans didn't come back. And that's what I think all these leagues are a little bit worried about, because they're all fighting over revenue and what the revenue split's going to look like. We're all talking about money, and we don't, as sports fans, separate aside from a conversation as attorneys, we don't talk about the revenue that the Yankees made in a given year or any type of team, but that's really the entire conversation right now, how the revenue is going to be split. So what these leagues are concerned about, is separate and aside from the safety issues and liability issues you're going to hit with a potential lawsuit, is that these conversations persist for longer, and you start turning fans off to the game. And then whatever way you want to slice the pie, you have to be concerned that pie then becomes a little bit smaller. And TJ, I think at least when it comes to baseball, I was very impressed that they came up with a deal on March 26th. It was called an interim deal to try to. I'm just coming inside with a lawnmower situation over here. But I was a little bit surprised March 26th when baseball and the Players Association came to terms on the deal, and that was basically 2 weeks into the pandemic. So now the situation is, do the players have a right to have that interim deal terms? Do they stick to those, or can they have a further reduction on that? And I think the logic behind baseball having this interim deal on 3/26 was exactly for what I was kind of referencing, to end the conversation early. Okay, this is what it's going to look like if there's a lockup. This is what the reductions are going to be. That's it. End of story. Let's not talk about it into April and May. But sadly, TJ, that's again the conversation you're kind of peeling off the scab at this point.
So I'm sure you're familiar with, but for anybody who's watching this who is not familiar with this, Curt Flood in the late 70s got all the way to the Supreme Court on a really big case about antitrust and being blackballed out of the league because he refused to play on a contract that he didn't like, and it created free agency in baseball. That was a Supreme Court case, and it set a precedent for how players would be treated moving forward. So my question to you is, how is this going to set new precedents for not just baseball, but all sports? Because I would imagine there's going to be quite a bit of pushback from players for safety reasons in all sports, as you've alluded to numerous times, but also for, hey, it's putting the obligation on teams to, you have to take care of these types of things. You can't allow, as an institution, stuff like this to spiral out of control the way that it has over the last 3 or 4 months and have no preparation in place. And I wonder whether or not, or how legality is going to affect that, because I imagine that is where we're headed in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. So I think the elephant in the room, and I've kind of alluded to it, there is no, how do I say this? There is no obvious answer for this problem. So I'll take you back, TJ, and I kind of saw this coming in really right around February, late February, early March. But do you remember when LeBron was saying he didn't want to play games in an empty stadium without fans?
Yeah.
This is like So I kind of said, and I looked at it and I go, okay, there are certain legitimate, understood, accepted reasons in professional sports for not playing games. We know the obvious ones, right? You're hurt. You're legitimately hurt and you can't play. Another one is, just like we were talking about my 6-month-old. If you have paternity or you're grieving someone, those are all carved out, recognized, understood, exceptions for not playing and not having your contract docked or anything like that. What is not a recognized exception, which maybe has to be, and maybe this is the precedent that it creates, is the fear of contracting some type of virus. I know, Michael Jordan's, we call it the flu game. I guess now it's the food poisoning game.
That's
But
right. Yeah.
now it's the food poisoning game. But there's no legitimate, at least there's no understood exception for not wanting to play in a game where someone else has the flu. We just don't hear that. It's not DNP parentheses fear of getting the flu from X player. But
Right.
now we have a real scenario with an airborne disease where it's not just the fear of getting the virus, it's the fear of this long-term effects and it's unknown. The only comparable situation that I've kind of come across in the history of sports and in modern sports is really the Magic Johnson HIV situation years and years ago. So this was like 91, 92. So Magic, for those that don't know, and I'm sure most do, Magic Johnson was diagnosed with HIV and decided to retire early from the NBA. And this was at a time where HIV, a lot of the country, their knowledge of HIV was similar to COVID. They just didn't know. They assumed that you could get HIV in certain ways, which turned out not to be true. But there was a real fear of it. So
Karl Malone
Magic,
threatened to not play against.
there you go.
Yeah.
No. Go ahead, TJ.
Yeah, no, Karl Malone threatened to not play against the Lakers. He's like, I'm not playing against a Magic because I don't want to get AIDS.
Right, and that's the fear, because you have guys like across the board, from a Blake Snell to a Larry Nance, and if you want to jump to a different sport like even WWE, like Roman Reigns, he's the big star there. He's previously had leukemia. These are real issues, and if Roman Reigns or Larry Nance, Crohn's disease, those guys aren't comfortable playing. At what point are they comfortable playing, and at what point does it become breach of contract? So, the late great David Stern was dealing with the Magic Johnson scenario. Magic, as many will recall, actually retired for a few years, so 2, 3, 4 years, and then he came back. So by that point, in order to kind of stop these group boycotts, like a guy like Karl Malone, a star, MVP of the league, future MVP of the league at that point. But David Stern had an educational seminar, took all the players around around basketball, and had a full seminar explaining how you could get HIV, how it was transmitted. You couldn't transmit it from sweat. It had to be something different. And he really painted such a clear picture that you could not contract it from playing basketball. It wasn't possible. So at that point, what he was doing in a legal sense, because David Stern was an attorney before he was the commissioner of the NBA, he was trying to paint a picture that at this point, refusal to play will be unjustified, because I've explained to you very clearly, these are experts. It would be unreasonable. A reasonable person would not refuse to play under these circumstances. The problem, TJ, at this level, with what we know with COVID, is this, I hate to say it, we still know very little about COVID. So these reasonings not to play, be it Larry Nance or Roman Reigns, they seem kind of reasonable, right? Why is Roman Reigns, who's, his life might be at risk as leukemia or with Crohn's disease with the, reduced autoimmune system. That's what we're dealing with. So, to answer your question about precedent, that's what we have to worry about here. At what point is a breach of contract, right? Not playing, not performing under your contract. At what point is that justified or unjustified? So we'll see, the type of, also Adam Silver is also a former attorney. So is Gary Bettman. So we'll see the seminars that they can put forward, as much information as they could possibly know. But that's what I expect to happen here. And they're going to create a blueprint for, really what point someone's refusal to play is permissible. And then, TJ, to the other question we talked about earlier, what that carve out will look like. Major League Baseball is reporting that there will be some type of a carve out for players that are uncomfortable playing. But I personally, me as an attorney, and TJ, I don't know if you know this, I don't know what that carve out would be. Does the player just not get paid? Does his contract continue to run and he becomes a free agent? Or does his contract freeze? Those are the questions that all sports are grappling with right now.
Right. Yeah. If they consider it like, a reasonable person, or the interpretation that you were talking about, whether they go reasonable or unreasonable expectations. Because I know that if a NFL player holds out, their contract freezes. I think that's the way that it's set up right now in the CBA, is that if they refuse to play for a year, their contract is suspended and then carries over to the next season. So there's no way in which a holdout could actually get them out of their contract,
I think that's the Melvin Gordon situation we saw this past year.
Right. So, that's obviously a huge part of it. And questions about whether or not players are going to play. Another big part of it I wanted to ask you about is the difference between the revenue that teams are getting and how important it is to them for fans in the stands. Obviously, that's important. But then also, too, there is this press to get games played because of the television money and how big that is now and how important that is to all of the sports leagues. Because I would imagine that right now, a lot of these sports leagues and TV networks are like, what do we do? What do we do with this? Because there's a lot of money getting paid to sports leagues from TV networks to carry these games, and right now they're not carrying any games.
Yeah, I mean the TV money is huge. I think where this is kind of at its boiling point is at the NBA. I'll try not to get too technical, but there's really two forms of TV contracts, and the revenue is either going to the teams or the league in some sense. So there's national TV contracts, and then there's these RSN, which are called regional sports network contracts. So no one's ever really had to deal with these issues before, but now, you have to dig through all the fine print, just like we were talking about force majeure clauses in contracts. Now we're talking about, the minimum triggering event for the contract to be fully vested, which is a fancy way of saying in these regional sports contracts, how many games are required to be televised for 100% of the revenue to trigger and vest with the teams. So these regional sports contracts across the NBA require 70 games to be televised. 70. So if you have a game that's nationally televised, if you're like the Los Angeles Lakers and it's not on the local sports network, that doesn't count. So, you don't just need 70 games, you need 70 locally televised games. So the reason I bring up this number in the context of will sports come back, what they look like, if the NBA and these regional sports teams, regional sports contracts, if 70 games aren't reached, the NBA's attorneys are worried that they're going to have to return some of the money that they've already gotten under these contracts and have to actually give these back to networks because they're not fulfilling their end of the contract. And TJ, I know I mentioned earlier, right, we're still fighting over how the pie is being sliced up, but losing revenue and not hitting 70 is dramatically decreasing the size of that pie. So, I've done a number of polls on Twitter just to try to get people's sentiments. I try to see, do you think the NBA will go straight to the playoffs, finish all 82 games, hit 70 games? And the sentiment seems to be that everyone wants the NBA just to go directly to the playoffs. But here's the reason, understanding the law and understanding these 70 game provision in these contracts. That's why someone like a Mark Cuban is saying, no, let's have some warm up games. Let's actually get, he says finish the regular season, but he might just trying to do 70. And again, just for the casual fan out there, just if you're trying to read the breadcrumbs and trying to understand and unwind the mystery of this, the NBA draft lottery was actually supposed to happen yesterday on May 19th. So we would have seen, who would have got the first overall pick. That was canceled. And you have to ask yourself as sports fans, if the season was really going to go directly into the playoffs right now, there's no tiebreakers for the 8th and 9th seeds. Those are very clearly delineated who the 8th team is and who in each conference. Right. So if the NBA really wanted to, at this point, was planning to cancel the season and go directly into the playoffs, TJ, there's no reason they wouldn't just run the draft lottery.
Right.
It just the standings would just be locked in place. So then, when you see Mark Cuban say we want to finish the season, and I'm happy to share the link with you as well, the 70 games. Now you've seen that the NBA really does look like it wants to finish the season out because that revenue is so important to keep at this point.
Well, yeah, and two, this is not the first time this year, or at least this season, that the NBA has, let people know how important that revenue is to them. I mean, the revenue is very important to these sports leagues. I'm not trying to diminish anybody's pursuit of excellence. This is not what this is really about. I am surprised that the NBA and other major sports leagues around around America, around the United States, had seemingly no insurance plan for this. There's only one place. I think Wimbledon had pandemic insurance, but at the very least, like some sort of blanket insurance policy that covers you and cover it for stuff like this. I'm very surprised that with all of the money that has been generated through sports that they don't have insurance policies in place for things like this. Because we know they exist. I mean, Wimbledon had a policy. So I think they got paid out $38 million or something for not having Wimbledon because they had the right insurance policy.
I think that's right for
Oh, we may have lost you, Dan.
I think that'll be more. I know the East Church for the.
Oh, we're back. We're back. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So, can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Let me just get to it. Okay. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I can hear you. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I apologize that that got cut, but the Big East also is on record as having insurance as well. So
okay,
it's possible some of these other colleges might have insurance. The question is, for when it comes to Wimbledon, they it was an investment. Over a certain amount of years, every year they give a certain amount of millions of dollars. It's funny. The NCAA generally also had their own. The certain revenue each year was being contributed to a total NCAA pot, just in case there was some type of doomsday scenario. This was over the course of maybe 10 years, from I think it was like 2005 to 2015, 2016. So as per reports, I think Yahoo had the report, but they had like 500 million in this pot that was just being, a certain amount of revenue was being taken off each year. And do you remember that Ed O'Bannon lawsuit where they had to pay out, nine figures?
Yep.
That pot of money that was supposed to be set aside for a doomsday scenario, that actually went as part of the settlement to the NCAA. So
their doomsday was Ed O'Bannon.
Yeah, so different doomsday came back. So that's I'm surprised too that more sports didn't have it. I'm also surprised in terms of just the legalese. The NBA is the only sport, as far as I've seen. I've seen a number of these force majeure clauses that had planned for something like an epidemic, right? It actually says the word epidemic in the force majeure, so you know that that's a triggering event. Just switch different context, different sport. Alabama football, they have to schedule a number of non-conference games. I saw their force majeure clause. They don't have epidemic. They don't have anything talking about an airborne disease. But what they do have, just curiously, they do have the cancellation of games based on some type of rebellion or an uprising, which I'm not sure what's more common, a rebellion or a pandemic. But now you're going to start seeing people, when this force majeure clause, include everything under the sun, because when it comes to Alabama football, truthfully, they're in a very difficult spot. Because can games be played like this? I mean, maybe. There's nothing in their force majeure clause that's obviously a triggering event. Whereas basketball, we know right now you could trigger that force majeure clause because there's an epidemic. So Alabama and other businesses around the country could be held in breach because it's not really clearly spelled out what happens and if the force majeure event is triggered.
Yeah, that's this is why we got caught off guard, because nobody knows how to define, from a legal perspective anyways, what's going on, or even that they needed to, right? Because sports has been this thing that has evolved. Like obviously during the Spanish influenza, sports existed, right? We have pictures of like Georgia Tech games where people are wearing masks in the stands and things like that. So like obviously, they were like, okay, let's keep doing this. This is pretty great. But there wasn't the money attached to it the way that it is now. And now that there's so much money and there's so much equity in the sport, people have not just invested their time and effort into it, but they've invested their wealth into it. Now that that's a part of the equation, this whole thing changes in terms of the importance of sports to communities and the impact that they have. I mean, every time some sports team wants a new stadium or arena or something, they talk about the economic impact that their sport has on the community that they're a part of. Jerry Jones gets $500 million from the city of Dallas or Arlington or whatever to help build Jerry World because of all of those businesses that get really good things from the Cowboys being in that area. Because it creates a huge economic impact. So they get that. And I think everybody understands the influence that sports has at this point, not just on the team and the players specifically, but the people in general. So I totally understand like the importance of this. At the same time, though, sports is sports. It's not an essential function of society. So that's all the other part of it. For sports fans, you want sports back. I get that. It's really important. But then there's the other side. There's the other half of America that we sometimes forget about that does not give a rip about sports. They love other things, right? They love music and entertainment and they're just into other stuff, right? They've got different hobbies, different things that they do on the weekends, which is fine. But they look at this and they think about the crazed sports fan right now who's going crazy because they don't have their sports back, and they think you're ridiculous. It doesn't matter. And they look at the business owners the exact same way, and they're like, I don't care if you're going to lose your wealth. Why would I care if you lose your wealth? Why would I care if you, as a quarterback or a point guard or a shortstop, are losing out on your contract? You already have money. There's a pandemic, and like poor people are dying who can't help. They're helpless. So like, what's the at that point, it becomes a moral argument, and that's where people get really uncomfortable because you can't make moral arguments for non-essential things. At least and so the question is whether or not you view sports as essential, and that is a very subjective question.
Well, if you're in Florida, it's not subjective; it's objective because they decided to declare professional wrestling essential business. So if
Yeah.
if essential business is wrestling, anything can be essential at this point. So I think TJ, this is what if I'm a commissioner of a league, if I'm Adam Silver, is what I'm concerned about. I've been we mentioned the Bundesliga earlier. The Bundesliga has an interesting scenario that it's something that's happening right now there that we should be paying attention to domestically. I guess there was word, so the Bundesliga started back up. The German, for those who don't know, we keep saying it's the German Pro Soccer League. It's like the English Premier League, but it's Germany's version. So they wanted to play. They're not doing bubble scenarios. They're actually playing in their home stadiums to the extent possible. And there's no fans allowed inside the arena or outside the arena, which, it's probably what we're going to have here in some sense, unless we do a bubble where someone's going to be at a neutral field, but there still could be the potential for fans to be outside the arena. So I guess there was rumblings that fans wanted to support their team from the parking lot or, just go around and whatever they wanted to do. So the Dortmund police, Dortmund's a city in Germany, they made an announcement that they were prepared to block fans and do whatever they felt necessary to keep the peace. So why do I bring that up? You talked about the other half of the country that doesn't care about sports, which, that's totally fair. They don't have to care about sports. If the police are dedicating resources to stop crazed sports fans from going to the stadium, that's not a good look for the sport. It's not really good for anything. I'm watching, I'm on Twitter. I watch very closely these different videos. I see there was a viral video of people protesting a gym being closed at some part of our country. I think it was Texas. Now,
doing push-ups outside of like 24-hour fitness. Yeah.
Right. Can you imagine, TJ, if there's a Dallas Cowboys game and fans aren't allowed in that arena and the fans know that the Cowboys are there and all these people that love to tailgate, like, let's say there's a wave of people that want to go and tailgate, and the Dallas, the Fort Worth police are called to break up tailgating. That's not a good look for anybody. People are thinking. And now, so that's bad PR number one. And we talked about the 94 strike. You don't want bad PR, especially like this. The other problem, TJ, when it comes to the people on the other side, the other side of the coin, the people that don't care about sports, for the NBA to return, they've announced that they think they need about 15,000 tests to conduct daily tests. You take 15,000 tests off the market, it's then that much harder for the public, the non-sports fans or players, to get tests or PPE. So that's the other fear. So Silver, I guess, has been assured by manufacturers that you could get 15,000 tests, but He said, even though I could get 15,000 tests, I'm not ready to play that card and get the 15,000 until the public has an abundance of tests. So you're seeing commissioners and leagues be very careful about the wording, because what they don't want to do is to lose those fans, all right, or get this negative sentiment among other fans, or potentially have the police called on fans if this isn't handled correctly. So that's the conversation that's going on, again, behind the scenes, because separate aside from liability, there's the PR element, because you need fans to come back at the end of the day.
All right, so to shift focus, because we've spent a lot of time on, and not to say that it's not important to spend a lot of time on, but I did want to ask you some other sports legal questions. The most important sports contract right now in Denver is Patrick Mahomes' contract. And so I'm in Denver. People want to know. I want to know this. Is the players union going to let Patrick Mahomes Tom Brady this bitch and just keep taking discounts every single year and not get paid like a top number one quarterback should be? Because if he takes discounts, then the franchise tag number, which is based off of the top 10 salaries at your position, is going to go down. But if you keep the franchise tag number high, based off the top 10, the way to do that is to make sure that the best players get paid as much as possible, because that's what's good for players. So what's going to happen with that?
I mean, it's anyone's best guess. I mean, I would have thought, just in the scenario that happened, this past offseason, I would think that the Cowboys would just pay Dak, as opposed to let him reset the franchise market, year over year, or even what Kirk Cousins did a couple of years ago. So I guess that's anyone's best guess. And at the end of the day, the Players Association can only, influence Mahomes so much. If Mahomes wants to take the security of a long-term contract instead of resetting that franchise market, or the tender market, that's his prerogative. We all know we're not, Patrick Mahomes is the most valuable asset in all of football right now. So if he were to hit the open market, the guy would make a boatload of money. So the question is, what's more valuable to the football, the Players Association, a giant multi-year contract, or just a continuous resetting of this tender? You can make the argument both ways, but it's for a guy like Mahomes. If I'm Mahomes' agent, let's just put it this way. TJ, I know I can gather you probably watched The Last Dance. Is that a fair assumption?
Yes. Yeah.
So Scottie Pippen's agent got hit with a lot of bad PR that he gave Scottie this terrible contract, but in a different context, a couple years ago, Madison Bumgarner is another guy in baseball who took a very small contract in exchange for some security. Evan Longoria did the same thing. Troy Tulowitzki did the same thing. So superstars tend to, you see it, take the guarantee as opposed to trying to hit the lottery with some massive contract and hit free agency. So I think there's a world where Mahomes takes the certainty of a deal just to make sure he gets paid for his life, for his career. Because God forbid, the sport of football, you can have an injury that, takes away your explosiveness, in any given game.
Independent of the salary cap, how much is Patrick Mahomes worth on a yearly basis to a football team?
Well, put it this way. I think if you anonymously polled all 32 general managers and you had like a Madden style fantasy draft, Patrick Mahomes would be the first pick on, I want to say, all 32 out of 32 teams. The quarterback is so important to an offense. All you really need is a Patrick Mahomes. He's almost, and I wrote a lot about Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan, just for point of reference, just to kind of tie in The Last Dance, Michael Jordan was, at the time in basketball, allowed to have an uncapped contract. You could have that in basketball in the late 90s. You could exceed the salary cap to sign your own players, and there was no cap as to how high you could go. So for point of reference, the NBA salary cap in 98 was about $27 million. And at that same time, TJ, so if you're wondering how much Mahomes is worth, he's the most valuable player on a team. He's probably as valuable as a Michael Jordan. You just need a Patrick Mahomes to have a competitive team. That's really all you would need. So I don't know if you could put an exact dollar amount on it, but you can make the case that you just need one guy to have the roster. So, imagine whatever the NFL salary cap is worth. Michael Jordan was worth literally more than the salary cap to the Bulls, and I'm sure they would have paid him more if they could have. So then put that in perspective. What could Mahomes make on the open market? I mean, if that's really all you need to have a competitive team, to have an 8-win team, 9-win team, just one superstar quarterback, that's give you a good idea about the market he would reset.
Yeah, I mean, reasonably, I think he's probably he should get at least $40 million a season, guaranteed. I mean, like, if we're being completely honest, I think his bargaining chips at this point is I put down a number and you say yes, period. I think that's kind of where he's at. I mean, like, who's gonna go in that room for Clark Hunt and the Kansas City Chiefs and say, well, actually, like, who's going to do that? No one. For any franchise, no, you're not worth that at this point. I mean, if he's smart in terms of, from an individual perspective, if he's smart, he is going to get as much money as he possibly can. And he's going to, and that's because that's what an alpha dog does, right? It's like, okay, I'm the top dog, and I'm going to get treated like it, or I'm going to go somewhere else. And I don't know if that's his mentality or not, because if he's like Tom Brady, Brady didn't need or didn't want to do that, and I do think people are going to start to realize just how much Bill Belichick made Tom Brady. As much as I like Tom Brady, I think that tandem is way more effective than just the individual exceptionalism of Brady. And, I think that probably is also true a little bit for Mahomes with Andy Reid. But, I mean, if we're being completely frank about this, no one views it that way, because Andy Reid didn't win any championships before he got Patrick Mahomes. It went from Andy Reid has this insurmountable mountain that he can't climb. All he needed was the best quarterback I've ever seen. That's all he needed to get over that hump.
Yeah.
Is the best quarterback I've ever seen.
It's funny how one game could change someone's legacy like that. If he loses that game, which, he was losing for most of the game, we're not talking about Andy Reid like this. And, TJ, as crazy as it sounds, we might not even be talking about Patrick Mahomes like this too. But, that being said, as you were talking, so part of my background, I used to work for the Giants. I also had a brief stop in baseball, on the baseball arbitration side. So, you'd be surprised how much, what's the expression? You bite your nose to spite your face, right? Something like that.
Up to spite your face, yeah.
Yeah, if you're Michael Scott, I think it's spider face is what he says. But
spider face, yeah.
Spider face. So in the arbitration context in baseball, you have teams, have their attorneys, and you have the player's agent, and they literally fight over the salaries. And what players, what the teams have to do is nitpick and tell you how bad a player is to try to get a better deal on the table. So they'll tell you, well, there's a famous case a couple years ago with Dylan Betances of the Yankees, one of their big relievers. But apparently it was so contentious between the Yankees and Betances that Betances left the team. He goes, well, if I'm so bad, if I give up that many home runs and I labor this much in the eighth inning, I don't know why you want me on the team. So, when you're thinking about these conversations, when you walk into a room, with the Hunt family, you just kind of come off, you don't want to. Obviously, everyone knows how good Patrick Mahomes is, but the Chiefs have to make some type of argument to give him a lower salary. But you only do that by, negging him is the word that is coming to mind. But you say something bad that he's done, or how fragile he could be, or how he needs to prove it. That's not something you want to tell your superstar quarterback if you want to have a long-term deal. So I would imagine that the strategy is to get this done as non-contentiously as possible, because what you don't want is to have something that's going on in Dallas right now with Dak Prescott and the Jones family. I think, even now with the new signing of a guy like Andy Dalton, there's enough, smoke where people are saying, oh, Andy is being brought in to replace Dak. You want to get this contract done. You want to get it hammered out with. So as much as the Players Association might like to see him take this tender and bet on himself, I imagine for all sides, and if they're trying to continue this legacy and keep it going for the immediate future, I think a deal with some guaranteed and some security makes a lot of sense for both sides.
So when it comes to Dak Prescott and the Cowboys, this has been going on for like 2 years now, right? People have been talking about Dak Prescott and whether or not he deserves to get a huge salary, and whether or not the money he's asking for is legitimate, whether or not he's an average quarterback or not. I think everybody in that division compares him to Carson Wentz, because Carson Wentz had an MVP caliber season before he got injured, and Nick Foles took over a few seasons ago. And so now the fact that he played better, performed better, significantly better than Carson Wentz did last season, people are like, yeah, pay Dak. And with Jerry Jones, I think he's negotiating against his own mortality sometimes, because you can really get the sense with him that he's like, I don't know how much you listen to the Fan down in Dallas, but like I've listened to the Fan a lot because I like listening to Jerry Jones go on that morning show with I think it's Raj. I can't remember who it is. RJ, and something.
I've been on the Fan with Chris Arnold a couple of times, the afternoon show. But yeah, I do.
Yeah, so like I'm curious what you think, because he talks about his death all the time. Jerry Jones is like, I'm not going to be around much longer. And he says it like every week. I'm like, come on, Jerry, stop thinking about your own death so much, because I think it's affecting your GM strategy. I do think that he's like, if I don't sign Dak, we're going to have to start rebuilding, and I don't have time for that. I think that's kind of where he's at right now with some of this. Oh, I can't hear you. We may have lost. Oh, can I unmute you?
Oh, can you hear me now?
Oh, there we go. Yeah. I think you got muted somehow by accident.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So we were making this joke years ago when they took Zeke really early in the first round. Like, why would you take a running back so early unless you think the team's ready to go, right? You have some immediate window if you draft a running back that high. So we've been making the joke for years, and it seems to CeeDee Lamb is early. That's not a I think. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you draft a guy like CeeDee Lamb, that's another type of immediate window type move. So, I don't want Jerry to be talking about his mortality either. But his moves are indicating that he has a very tight window to win. He keeps investing money into the team. I think that's a reason why the head coaching decision was delayed for year over year, because when you bring a new head coach in, there's going to be a period of rebuilding. So maybe that's the reason Jason Garrett kept his job. Probably it's the reason Jason Garrett kept his job for so long, because there was no other logical explanation to that. But yeah, I mean, I told you I used to work for the Giants, so Dallas Cowboys are not so high in my book, but you have to speak objectively. They have a very, very potent offense on the table.
Yeah. Well, this has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate you coming on. We've gone through a lot of stuff, and I would love to have you back on again for another episode. This has been a really insightful, educational conversation. I like sports law. I find it very intriguing. So thank you very much for coming on.
My absolute pleasure. Happy to come on anytime, TJ.
All right. Thanks, Dan. Take care. All right.